The freezing waters of the Ohio River surged violently beneath the steel ruins of the Silver Bridge on a dark December evening in 1967. Moments before the catastrophe struck the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, the air was filled with the sounds of holiday traffic and festive cheer. But silence soon followed the deafening roar of twisting metal and snapping cables that sent dozens of vehicles plunging into the icy depths below. While investigators would later blame a minute's structural failure for the tragedy, the residents of Point Pleasant whispered about a darker omen. For 13 months prior to the collapse, the town had been besieged by a winged nightmare with glowing red eyes. Was the disaster a mere accident, or was it the final prophecy of the entity known as the Mothman? To understand the horror that gripped this quiet community, we must look back to the peculiar atmosphere of Point Pleasant in the mid-60s. Nestled at the confluence of the Ohio and Kanawha rivers, the town was a typical industrial hub, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. However, just outside the town limits lay the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, locally known as the TNT area. This vast tract of land was once the site of a World War II explosives manufacturing facility. By 1966, the concrete bunkers were overgrown with vegetation, and the tunnels were shrouded in shadow. Locals often reported strange lights and eerie feelings near the abandoned munitions plant, but nothing could prepare them for the creature that was about to emerge from the darkness. The first recorded sighting of the entity actually occurred outside of Point Pleasant in the nearby town of Clendenin on November 12, 1966. 5 men were digging a grave in a cemetery when something massive disturbed the trees above them. As they looked up in terror, a brown winged figure lifted off from the canopy and glided over their heads. The men described it as having the shape of a man, but with wings. They stood paralyzed as the creature disappeared into the distance, leaving them to question their sanity. This event was merely the prelude to a wave of terror that would soon center itself squarely on the abandoned bunkers of the TNT area. 3 days later, on the night of November 15, 2 young couples were driving through the TNT area near the old power plant. Roger Scarberry and Steve Mallette, along with their wives, spotted 2 large red lights in the shadows by an old generator house. As they drove closer, they realized with horror that the lights were eyes. The creature attached to those eyes was a large gray figure shaped like a man, but standing nearly 7 feet tall. It had massive wings folded against its back, and it shuffled clumsily on 2 legs. Panic instantly took hold of the group as the driver slammed on the gas pedal to escape the nightmare standing before them. The car sped away, reaching speeds of over 100 miles per hour as they raced toward the safety of the Point Pleasant city limits. To their disbelief, the creature took to the air and followed them. It did not flap its wings, but glided effortlessly above their vehicle, keeping pace with the speeding car. The witnesses reported hearing a high-pitched squeaking sound similar to a large mouse or a phonograph record playing at high speed. The winged pursuer chased them all the way to the edge of town before banking away into the night sky, leaving the 4 young people trembling and terrified. Upon reaching the Mason County Courthouse, the couples rushed inside to find Deputy Millard Halstead. Halstead was a seasoned lawman who had seen much in his career, but he had never seen fear like this. He later stated that he knew these young people, and they were not the type to make up stories. Taking their report seriously, Halstead followed them back to the TNT area to investigate. Although the creature was gone, the police radio in his cruiser emitted strange static and garbled noises that ceased once they left the vicinity. This electronic interference would become a hallmark of the Mothman phenomenon. The following morning, the story broke in the local press, and the legend was born. A copy editor named the creature Mothman after a character from the popular Batman television series. The name stuck, and soon the quiet town of Point Pleasant was overrun with reporters, curiosity seekers, and monster hunters. But the sightings did not stop. Over the next year, more than 100 respectable citizens would report encounters with the bird. They included firemen, farmers, and teachers. The descriptions were chillingly consistent, involving a gray humanoid form with a 10-foot wingspan and hypnotic glowing red eyes set deep into its chest. One particularly harrowing encounter involved a woman named Marcella Bennett. She was visiting friends who lived in a bungalow near the TNT area. As she stepped out of her car with her baby in her arms, she saw a tall gray figure rising from the ground near her vehicle. The creature stared at her with those massive red eyes, and she was so overcome with fear that she dropped her child. Recovering quickly, she grabbed her baby and ran inside the house, where the family locked the doors and huddled in terror. The creature moved onto the porch and peered through the windows, its eyes glowing in the darkness, until police finally arrived. As the hysteria grew, a man named John Keel arrived in Point Pleasant to investigate. Keel was a writer and ufologist who would become central to the Mothman lore. He began interviewing witnesses and collecting data, attempting to find a pattern in the chaos. Keel soon realized that the Mothman sightings were not isolated events. They were accompanied by a plague of other strange phenomena, including unidentified flying objects, poltergeist activity, and strange lights in the sky. Point Pleasant had become a window area, a focal point for high strangeness that defied logical explanation. During his investigation, Keel and other witnesses began to report encounters with mysterious men. These individuals, often referred to as men in black, drove immaculate dark cars and wore ill-fitting suits. They possessed a strange cadence to their speech and an unnatural appearance, often described as having olive skin and pointed features. These menacing figures would harass witnesses, warning them to stop talking about what they had seen. They seemed to know details about the witnesses' lives that no stranger could possibly know, adding a layer of paranoia to an already tense situation. The strangeness escalated when witnesses began receiving bizarre phone calls. The voices on the other end were often metallic or electronic, delivering nonsensical messages or rhythmic beeping sounds. John Keel himself claimed to be plagued by these calls. He believed that the entity or entities behind the Mothman phenomenon were intelligent and were actively toying with the investigators. The lines between reality and hallucination began to blur for those deeply involved in the case as the psychological toll of the constant surveillance and fear mounted. Among the most disturbing aspects of the investigation were the prophecies. Some witnesses, including a man named Indrid Cold, who claimed to be an alien entity, communicated vague predictions of future disasters to locals. John Keel began to receive messages warning of a great blackout and a terrible tragedy that would strike the region. He became convinced that the Mothman was a harbinger of doom sent to warn, or perhaps merely to observe a coming catastrophe. Keel frantically tried to decipher the messages, believing that a massive power failure or an assassination was imminent. The sightings of the Mothman continued throughout 1967, becoming more brazen. The creature was seen standing on roofs, sitting in trees, and gliding over the Ohio River. Farmers reported their livestock vanishing or dying of fright. Dogs would bark frantically at invisible intruders before cowering in fear. The entire town felt like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. The atmosphere was thick with dread, and many residents refused to go out at night. The TNT area remained the epicenter, but the sphere of influence was widening. By December 1967, the tension in Point Pleasant was palpable. The holiday season had arrived, but the festive lights could not dispel the gloom that hung over the town. John Keel felt a sense of impending doom growing stronger each day. He had warned authorities of a potential disaster, but his warnings were too vague to be actionable. The phenomena seemed to be building toward a crescendo. The red eyes of the Mothman had been seen by so many that it was no longer a question of if it existed, but rather what it wanted. On the evening of December 15, 1967, the Silver Bridge was packed with rush-hour traffic and holiday shoppers. The bridge was an I-bar chain suspension bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio. Built in 1928, it was a vital artery for the region. As cars and large trucks inched across the span, the steel was groaning under the weight. The traffic light on the Ohio side had turned red, causing a standstill on the bridge. It was a cold, gray evening, and the sun had already set, leaving the bridge illuminated only by headlights and street lamps. At exactly 5 p.m., a loud cracking sound echoed across the river like a gunshot. A single I-bar in the suspension chain had failed due to a microscopic stress fracture and corrosion. The failure triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. The suspension chains whipped violently, and the vertical suspenders snapped. The entire center span of the bridge twisted and flipped upside down, throwing vehicles and passengers into the freezing dark water below. The collapse took less than 20 seconds. The roar of the falling steel was heard for miles around, silencing the town. Chaos erupted on the riverbanks. Witnesses watched in horror as headlights sank beneath the surface of the Ohio River. The cries for help were drowned out by the splashing water and the groaning of twisted metal. Local boats and emergency responders rushed to the scene, but the darkness and freezing temperatures made rescue efforts incredibly difficult. It was a scene of absolute devastation. The bridge, which had stood as a landmark for nearly 40 years, was gone, reduced to a pile of debris in the murky water. The rescue mission quickly turned into a recovery operation. Divers braved the dangerous currents and tangled wreckage to retrieve the victims. The town of Point Pleasant held its breath as the body count rose. In the end, 46 people lost their lives in the disaster. 2 bodies were never recovered. It remains the deadliest bridge collapse in United States history. The tragedy shattered the community, touching nearly every family in the small town. The grief was overwhelming, and the psychological scars would last for generations. In the aftermath of the Silver Bridge collapse, the sightings of the Mothman stopped abruptly. The creature that had haunted the town for 13 months vanished as if it had never existed. This sudden disappearance led many to believe that the entity was directly connected to the tragedy. Was the Mothman trying to warn the town of the impending collapse? Or was it a harbinger of death, attracted to the sight of a future calamity, like a vulture circling a dying animal? The correlation between the end of the sightings and the disaster was too strong for many to ignore. John Keel was devastated by the event. He felt that the prophecies and warnings he had received were pointing to this moment, but he had failed to understand them in time. His book, The Mothman Prophecies, would later chronicle his investigation and the strange events leading up to the collapse. Keel posited that the entity was not a biological animal, but an ultra-terrestrial being from a dimension that intersects with our own. He believed the phenomenon was a cosmic joke played on humanity by forces beyond our comprehension. Investigators from the federal government descended on Point Pleasant to determine the cause of the collapse. They spent years analyzing the wreckage, eventually pinpointing the cause to a cleavage fracture in IBR 330. The bridge had been carrying loads far heavier than it was designed for, and poor maintenance had allowed corrosion to weaken the critical steel component. While science provided a mechanical explanation, It could not explain the 13 months of high strangeness that preceded the fall. The official report made no mention of the red-eyed monster. The legend of the Mothman did not die with the victims of the Silver Bridge. It grew, spreading across the world. The story became a staple of cryptozoology and paranormal lore. Point Pleasant embraced its strange history, eventually erecting a 12-foot-tall stainless steel statue of the creature in the center of town. An annual Mothman festival now draws thousands of visitors who come to celebrate the legend toward the TNT area and pay their respects to the victims of the bridge collapse. Skeptics have offered various natural explanations for the sightings. The most popular theory is that the Mothman was actually a sandhill crane, a large bird with a wide wingspan and red patches around its eyes. These birds are rare in West Virginia, but can wander off their migration paths. Skeptics argue that the fear and hysteria of the time caused witnesses to misidentify a known animal as a monster. However, witnesses who saw the creature up close, including the Scarberries and Mallets, vehemently denied this, insisting that what they saw was no bird. Another theory suggests that the sightings were a result of mass hysteria or a sociological phenomenon. The Cold War anxiety, the isolation of the rural community, and the power of suggestion could have combined to create a collective hallucination. Once the first story was published, the seed was planted, and every shadow became a monster. Yet this theory fails to account for the physical evidence, such as the strange footprints found in the TNT area and the inexplicable electronic interference experienced by police officers and reporters. Some researchers have looked into the history of the land itself. The region was once the territory of the Shawnee chief Cornstalk. Legend says that as Cornstalk lay dying after being betrayed and murdered by soldiers, he cursed the land and its people for 200 years. Believers in the curse point to the flood's fires and the bridge collapse as evidence of the chief's vengeance. They view the Mothman as a manifestation of this ancient curse, a spiritual entity summoned to oversee the destruction. The bunkers of the TNT area still stand today, hidden deep within the McClintock Wildlife Management Area. They are dark, damp, and covered in graffiti. Visitors who venture into the tunnels often report feelings of being watched. Some claim to hear the flapping of heavy wings or see red lights piercing the darkness. The area retains a heavy atmosphere, a lingering residue of the events of 1966 and 1967. It is a place where history and mythology have fused together permanently. The psychological impact on the original witnesses was profound. Many of them suffered from nightmares and anxiety for years after their encounters. They were ridiculed by skeptics and hounded by the press, yet they stuck to their stories. They knew what they had seen. Their conviction adds a layer of credibility to the legend that is hard to dismiss. These were not attention seekers, but ordinary people who stumbled upon something extraordinary and terrifying. The connection between the Mothman and the men in black remains one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Who were these strange visitors, and who were they working for? Were they government agents trying to cover up a secret experiment at the old munitions plant? Or were they something more supernatural, part of the same phenomena as the bird itself? Their presence suggests that there was more going on in Point Pleasant than just a monster sighting. It implies a coordinated effort to control information and intimidate witnesses. Modern investigations into the Mothman continue to this day. Paranormal groups and documentary crews frequently visit Point Pleasant armed with advanced technology, hoping to capture evidence of the creature. While no definitive proof has ever been found, the allure of the mystery remains strong. The Mothman represents the ultimate unknown, a creature that defies classification and challenges our understanding of the natural world. It is a modern myth born in the atomic age. The legacy of the Silver Bridge collapse also led to significant changes in engineering and safety standards. Following the disaster, the United States Congress passed the National Bridge Inspection Standards, creating the first federal program to mandate regular inspections of the nation's bridges. The tragedy in Point Pleasant saved countless lives in the future by ensuring that such a catastrophic failure would be much harder to repeat. In this way, the victims of the disaster did not die in vain. Today, Point Pleasant is a quiet town once again, but the shadow of the Mothman looms large. The statue in the town square stands as a silent sentinel, a tribute to the strange events that put the town on the map. The museum across the street houses artifacts from the investigation and pieces of the Silver Bridge. It serves as a reminder of the thin line between legend and history. The town has learned to live with its ghosts, turning a horrific chapter of its past into a celebration of the unexplained. As we look back at the events of 1966 and 1967, we are left with more questions than answers. Was the Mothman a biological anomaly, an extraterrestrial visitor, or a mass hallucination? Was it a guardian trying to warn the town, or a demon relishing in the chaos? The truth may never be known, buried beneath the waters of the Ohio River and the passage of time. But for the people who looked into those glowing red eyes, the terror was all too real. The story of the Mothman Prophecies serves as a chilling reminder that there are things in this world that we cannot explain. It challenges us to look into the dark corners of our reality and question what looks back. Whether you believe in the legend or not, the convergence of the monster sightings and the bridge collapse creates a narrative that is impossible to forget. It is a story of high strangeness, tragedy, and the enduring power of mystery. Perhaps the Mothman is still out there, waiting in the shadows for the next disaster. Sightings of similar winged creatures have been reported before other calamities around the world, leading some to believe that the entity is an eternal witness to human suffering. As long as the unknown exists, the legend of the Mothman will continue to take flight in our collective imagination. The red eyes may be gone from Point Pleasant, but they are watching from the darkness of folklore forever.